During the summer of 1874, two men in a horse-drawn buggy pulled into an affluent neighborhood in Philadelphia and befriended two little boys who were playing in front of their stately home. For 5 days in a row, 4-year-old Charlie Ross and his 6-year-old brother Walter chatted with the men who gave them candy. On July 1st, 1874, the men pulled up as usual, but this time they offered to take the boys to buy candy and fireworks for the upcoming Independence Day holiday, and the boys agreed. After driving a ways, the men sent Walter into a shop to buy fireworks alone. When the boy came out, he discovered that the buggy with Charlie was gone. Several days after Walter's return, the boy's father, Christian Ross, received the first of 23 ransom letters from the kidnappers demanding $20,000 for Charlie's release. Despite living in a wealthy part of town, however, the family's fortunes had been greatly diminished by the stock market crash of 1873. Mr. Ross could not afford the ransom and was forced to go to the police. Detectives searched tirelessly for Charlie with no leads. Mr. Ross used a personal column in the local paper to try and communicate with the blackmailers, but to no avail. Later that December, two criminals, Joseph Douglas and William Marshall, were shot during a botched burglary in Brooklyn, New York. Marshall was killed instantly, but as Douglas lay dying, he confessed that the pair had been responsible for stealing Charlie Ross. He told authorities that the deceased Marshall had been the only person who knew where the boy was being held. Police later arrested a third member of the gang, William Westervelt, who was a disgraced Philadelphia policeman and brother-in-law to William Marshall. Although Westervelt insisted he was not involved in the actual kidnapping, police were convinced he was complicit in the abduction. While in prison, waiting for trial, Westervelt told Mr. Ross that Charlie had been alive when Marshall was killed. In August 1875, Westervelt went on trial for the kidnapping of Charlie Ross, and although the jury found him innocent of kidnapping, he was convicted of conspiracy and sentenced to 6 years in prison. For Christian Ross, the ordeal did not end with the death of Marshall and Douglas, or the incarceration of Westervelt. In 1876, he wrote The Father's Story of Charlie Ross, the Kidnapped Child, and poured all the profits from the book into the search of his son. Thousands of posters were posted in police stations, railroad stations, post offices, and ship ports across the nation. Over several decades, the Ross family spent over $60,000 looking for Charlie, which included following leads and investigating over 1,000 imposters who claimed to be their missing son. The kidnapping of little Charlie Ross was one of the great crimes of the Gilded Age. Yet, what really happened to him remains a mystery. I moved to my dad's when I was 10 and didn't know anyone in the area, except for the family my dad was friends with. She was a single mom with 3 kids. Luckily, there was a girl a couple years older than me, and we got to know each other over the years. We weren't close or anything like that, but ended up having some of the same friends. One night, my friend Rob was hanging out with her and her younger brother. They happened to be in the house alone because my friend's mom was at work. Her mother had been helping this one lady through her job and got to know her fairly well. She found out her sister was in a mental institution and was let out recently. That night, Rob is hanging out with my friend. They get a knock on the door. My friend thought it was just her mom. She knocks a certain way when coming in and answered it without thinking. Rob wasn't supposed to be there, so he takes off. He goes through the window to his house down the street. He never thought twice about it. Turns out it wasn't her mom. It was the sister of the lady her mom was helping, and she figured out through talking to her sister where her family lived and her mom's working schedule. She came in. No one knows the full details of that night. My friend's younger brother got away to the neighbors to call the police. All we know is that this lady brutally murdered my friend a week from Christmas, decapitated her, and left her body naked in a bathtub. She then hid her head. They had to look through the presents, and I don't know where they found it, but they did. I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral. I was 12 years old when my parents separated. Things had always been nasty between them, so I was glad that my mom had kicked my dad out. A few days later, my dad showed up at my middle school to pick up me and my brother. He said that he had talked to our mom, and she told him it was okay to pick us up and spend some time with us. So we get into his pickup, and I immediately notice that his shotgun is hanging on the rack of the back window. I used to go hunting with him, so I knew this was off season and that it was weird for the gun to be there. He calls our mom a little ways into the drive and says, "I've got the boys. I'll bring them home when I can come to. If not, tough shit." He hung up. She called and called, and he eventually turned his phone off. My mom said she called the police, but because they were still legally married, with no custody arrangement, there was nothing they could do. My dad ended up taking us to his mom's house. I remember him crying and asking if I would choose him in the divorce. I said no. I wanted to stay with my mom. And he starts throwing his head against the wall. The wall is dented and bloody, and he's got a couple knots swelling on his forehead. He said, "See, this is what you made me do. You don't want to make this any harder on me, do you?" So we're there for a couple days. My mom came and knocked on the door. My dad called the cops on her for trespassing, so she had to leave. Another day or two go by, and he finally says he'll take me to Lowe's, where my mom worked at the time, to see her and say hi. We walk in, start going down the lumber aisle, and I see my mom towards the back. She sees me and drops to her knees, crying, and throws her arms out for me. I run towards her and make it to her for about half a second before I'm snatched up and dragged back out the store. I could see my mom chasing after us, screaming, "Someone please help. He's got my baby." That's my little boy. We speed out of there and head down back country roads. I was crying and he just kept asking why I did it. Why did I have to mess it up? We finally get back to his mom's house, and there were a couple of cop cars there waiting. He finally gave up, and we got to go back to my mom. He never got in any kind of trouble for the whole thing, besides a nationwide ban from Lowe's. 2 days before my parents' divorce was final, my dad called my mom while she was at work saying, "Please call this off. We can fix this. We can work through it. I love you, please." Crying the whole time. She kept saying, "No, it's over." So he finally stops crying and says, "So this is how you want things?" My mother says yes. He says, "Okay then." About an hour and a half later, my mom gets another phone call at work. This time it's the fire department. Our house was on fire, and no one had seen it until a neighbor drove by and called it in. By this time, it was a total loss. The fire marshal ruled it as an arson, even saying it was a lover's fire or something because the fire had been started on or underneath their bed. I lost everything I ever had, minus the stuffed animal and the clothes on my back. He never got caught for this either.